Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And Wes, we got another double duty show here to do because we have another Thursday night game coming up. We haven't yet reviewed the Packers' last game, so...
What is today?
Yeah, what day of the week is it right now, actually?
It was Thursday.
But we're going to start with the Packers' Thanksgiving night victory. 30-17 over the Miami Dolphins was the final score. And, Packers did what they needed to do, getting 2 home wins in 5 days to get themselves to 9-3. And this one they went about it a little bit differently, but what was similar to the San Francisco game is the Packers jumped out on top, built themselves a big lead, and then kind of rode that to the finish line and walked out of Lambeau with another W.
These 2 games, Mike, between San Francisco and Miami, again illustrate how important a fast start is in the National Football League, because it's not just about the points you put on the board, it's how you really tell the opposition, you got to change your game plan.
Yeah.
Just like that game against the 49ers, the Dolphins were not able to get their run game going at all. Yes, I know Tua threw for 365 yards. I get all of that. But the fact is that from the very beginning, they were having to play from behind. And I just felt like Green Bay, how they were able to really manipulate what Miami wanted to do offensively, mixed in with a couple pivotal plays early on that sort of just shifted their momentum into Green Bay's favor. A lot of guys talked about it after the San Francisco game. They felt like that was a complete performance. I thought by and large this was a complete performance. A lot of stuff you can still improve upon, things you can correct, but I think over these last 3 games, really these 3 games since they last saw the Detroit Lions, you've seen the Green Bay Packers start to round into form.
Yeah, this game, quite frankly, you talk about momentum shifts. There was a big one very early on because Packers got the ball first, but went 3 and out, Jordan Love missed a deep throw to Jaden Reed when he was open. Packers had to punt, but those cold swirling winds in the late evening at Lambeau Field messed with Miami's punt returner, Washington there. He ends up muffing the punt. Robert Rochelle recovers. It's a 1st and goal situation from the 9-yard line. And the Packers went from 3 and out to 3 plays and in the end zone, and they were up 7-0. A big play by the special teams.
And as we were talking about with Rich Bisaccia on Monday night, the Packers being able to start that game, the longest kick return of the season by Keyshawn Nixon, blocked up very well. It looks like they're going to have that explosive start they want. Offensively, did not have the series they were looking for. Josh Jacobs even said it when I was asking him in the locker room afterwards. He felt like that was the only run, even though he only had 43 rushing yards, he felt like that was the only run he wanted back. He just wasn't happy with how he cut back. Packers end up having to punt despite having phenomenal field position, but then Robert Rochelle makes it right. And as we learned about afterwards, dealing with a lot of stuff on the personal side, had found out earlier on Thanksgiving morning that unfortunately 2 of his childhood friends had been killed down in Louisiana, played through it, played with a purpose and came up with a huge moment there. I also want to say, too, for Green Bay special teams, we were talking about this whole group sort of rounding into form. Some really impressive work that the special teams unit has done really in every phase and every unit and every core special teams area. And Green Bay gets the ball back. They turn it into a Jaden Reed touchdown, and they were off and running.
Yeah, from there, the offense, I felt much like the San Francisco game, the Packers established what they wanted to on the ground. They set the tone on the ground with the running game, and it was a combination of Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson and Jaden Reed.
Yes.
Had a nice run on an end around. I think by the end of the first half, not only had the Packers topped 100 yards rushing, they had 4 different ball carriers with 20 yards rushing, which just told you how much the focus was on, okay, run the football, try to get Miami's defense on its heels a little bit. And then by the end of the game, you look up and it's like, Jordan Love, he also threw for 275 yards, and the offense ended up having a pretty darn efficient night.
You have a longer history here with the Packers and covering games, but I can tell you what this game felt like to me. It felt like the 2014 season. And what I mean by that is that was the one year where you got prime Eddie Lacy mixed with a relatively healthy Aaron Rodgers. And you saw what Eddie Lacy did for Rodgers during that season and how he was really able to complement everything he was doing in the passing game. Yes, Josh Jacobs did not go off for 150 rushing yards in this game, and he had to fight for a lot of the yards that he did get. But whether it was the short yardage situations that he converted in and some of the passing game stuff that he did as well, those two things I thought were really a catalyst for what Green Bay did offensively. Green Bay already over 200 carries this season with Josh Jacobs. And for a guy that was brought in and heralded as such a all-pro rushing champion, a durable back, he's lived up to the hype here through the first 13 weeks.
Yeah, you mentioned what he did in the passing game. He ends up with over 100 yards from scrimmage in this game when he takes the check down throw in the fourth quarter, makes one of the best open field moves we've seen all season long, ends up getting 49 yards there. So between the rushing and the receiving, Jacobs goes over 100. The Packers go 3 out of 5 in the red zone, which I think has been not only the reduction in turnovers since the first Detroit game. The Packers have only turned the ball over once in their last 3 games. But after that Detroit game, the first one, the Packers had gone 1 for 4 in the red zone in that game, and they had dropped to 29th in the league in red zone offense.
Yep.
Since then, the Packers have converted 11 out of 15 red zone opportunities into touchdowns. They have climbed from 29th in the league in red zone offense to 18th. They've jumped 11 spots in 3 weeks because that efficiency has ratcheted up so high. So that has been a major improvement in where you see that and the turnovers, where this Packers team is very, very different from the first one that faced the Lions a month ago.
1,000%. And I just want to mention this to kind of to go off that as well. So many times the buzzword with football teams is, what's your identity? And it sometimes gets overblown. Sometimes there's truth to it, but I think a lot of times it gets overblown. What I look for in NFL teams is not necessarily what your identity is, but what are you good at?
Right.
And I think what we've seen as the Packers season has gone on is we've found out, okay, inside the red zone, whether it's a guy like Tucker Kraft that can extend plays, get those yards after catch, you can throw it down short 10 yards of the goal line and he's going to be able to make a push for the end zone, or a guy like Josh Jacobs being able to convert in those short area goal-to-go situations. There's confidence there. You don't have to reinvent the game of football. You can play the game the way it's intended. Your guys can win. I think that has been very encouraging from the Packers side of things. In addition to the fact that you've seen it didn't so much happen in this game, but the explosive plays in the passing game. Christian Watson did have the 46-yard reception, and obviously we've seen him go off for some big plays here the last couple weeks, but it can be a 23-yard Jaden Reed carry as well.
Yeah.
The multitude of options that Green Bay has offensively at its fingertips, the best thing that they've done all season long, whether Jordan Love has been in the lineup or not, is moving the football. And over these last 3 games now, we've seen them start to not only have that type of production, but be able to carry that through in the red zone and turn those into touchdowns.
Yeah, 11 out of 15 the last 3 games has been pretty impressive, and it's why the Packers have been putting up the point totals that they have. On the defensive side of the ball, you mentioned it earlier, a lot of passing yards for Tua Tagovailoa. It became pretty obvious early on what Jeff Hafley's game plan was here. The Packers did not have Jair Alexander once again, the team's number 1 cornerback, still not back from the knee injury. He has come back to practice this week. We'll see if he's going to be available Thursday night in Detroit. But without your number 1 corner, look, you're not going to line up man-to-man against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle with the Miami Dolphins when your best cornerback is not available. So Jeff Hafley, the game plan was try to flood the zones flood the passing lanes with your zone coverage, keep everything in front of you, rally to the ball and make tackles. We talked about last week how you can't let these guys break tackles because they take the short passes and turn them into explosive gains. And I thought the Packers did that. Yes, it got tiring. It got tiring to see Jonnu Smith in particular, the tight end for the Dolphins, catching the passes over the middle and getting 8 or 12 or 13-yard chunks as the Dolphins were trying to come back from the big deficit. But the Packers were okay with that because A, the Dolphins were going to burn some clock in order to try to come back, and then B, At the end of the day, the Miami Dolphins, one of the most explosive offenses in the league, had one pass completion for more than 16 yards.
Right.
I mean, the game plan was exactly that. And then where this game hinged defensively was when the score is 27-11, Miami drives down and they are at 2nd and goal on the 1-yard line. It's early in the 4th quarter. So a touchdown on a 2-point conversion there makes it a 1-possession game, would make it an 8-point game. But from 2nd and goal on the 1-yard line, you get a run stop from Rashawn Gary. You get a great pass breakup on a difficult play by Keyshawn Nixon on the play action to the right, throwback to the left to Jonnu Smith. And then you get the 4th down sack from Quay Walker with the big push from TJ Slayton up the middle. Really good coverage in the end zone by Nixon and Valentine, which Tua's got nowhere to go with the ball, and Walker eventually finishes it. That goal line stand where with a touchdown and a 2-point conversion, Miami had a chance to make it a 1-possession game there in the 4th quarter. It didn't happen. The Dolphins never really did get close, and the Packers put it away from there.
It was the key to the game. Obviously, I focused my actual story that's called Key to the Game on Rochelle and his fumble recovery early, but I felt like after that, the air completely left the balloon. The Packers were able to finish that thing. And what I liked the most about that series was, yes, it was Rashawn on 1st down, but then it ended up being the guys that you want to see making plays. Not that you don't want to see that with Rashawn, but it's almost expected. With Quay Walker, a guy that has been, had some ups and downs this season. And I think everybody from Matt LaFleur to Jeff Hafley, and even, I think to some extent, Quay himself has talked about, he's playing his best ball right now.
Yeah.
And intangible-wise, fundamentals-wise, just what he brings to the table on paper, he is a every down middle linebacker in this league. He is a Mike linebacker with speed. And I felt like this game, especially with not having Edgerrin Cooper, they were going to need to use a little bit more of his blitzing ability, and they did that. And he came
absolutely.
through. And right next to him, alongside of him, you have Isaiah McDuffie, who had an ankle injury that Matt LaFleur talked about. He didn't even think coming out of that San Francisco game he was going to be able to make the turn to Miami. Jeff Hafley then added they weren't even sure if he was going to be able to finish the second half against the 49ers. Not only that, McDuffie plays almost 90% of the snaps, has 10 tackles, forces a fumble, a key breakup on a 3rd down pass that ended up leading to another turnover on downs. The Packers came through with the guys that are sort of seen as, I think, the complementary pieces. And when you have that, you have a guy like TJ Slayton getting some push. That's what gives you the confidence now that this is a unit to be, trifled with.
Yeah.
And could potentially help you win some of these games into the month of December.
Yeah, that sequence at the end of the first half is worth mentioning here, too, before we move on, because the score is 21-3. The Packers are sitting on a pretty good lead. But Miami's got the ball late in the first half. They cross midfield. They're looking to get some points, and Miami's going to get the ball coming out at the start of the 3rd quarter. 3rd down and 5. The Dolphins are not yet in field goal range. They need to get this 1st down to get into field goal range. 3rd down and 5, and a dump off pass over the middle. McDuffie comes up and makes a big hit. I believe it was Malik Washington, the receiver / returner. Washington takes that hit from McDuffie, can't hang on to the ball, incomplete pass, 4th and 5, and Tua makes a bad throw on 4th and 5, so it's a turnover on downs. The Packers get it back, 22 seconds on the clock, but the Packers have all 3 of their timeouts, use a couple of passes to Tucker Kraft, a nice run by Chris Brooks, get in range using the timeouts wisely. Brandon McManus comes out and drills a field goal at the end of the first half. So instead of looking at possibly 21-6, if the Dolphins get a touchdown and then they're getting the ball coming out to start of the 3rd quarter at 21-6, instead the game is 24-3. It was a clear 6-point swing where then it wasn't as crucial in a sense that Miami was going to get the ball starting the 3rd quarter because the Packers had then added to their lead. That sequence there, which really, in my mind, started with the big hit by McDuffie to break up the 3rd down pass, that played a big part in how this game unfolded as well.
And things could have shifted there, too. Miami getting the ball in the second half. I mean, being able to, do the double up, that's something that everyone under the Shanahan tree mostly wants to always accomplish.
Yeah.
Even when it looks like 24-3, well, that score changes if it suddenly becomes 24-17. And the Packers didn't allow that to happen. They actually ended up tacking on some more points. I thought it was very important, too. Matt LaFleur made kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke about it at the podium on Sunday where he said, yeah, I mean, you got to save those timeouts, right, in the first half. I mean, so many times I think there's people out there that just think, okay, well, the second half, you got to save them as long as you can. The first half, if you need to take a few here and there. No, you saw in this game the value of being able to keep all three of those timeouts. 22 seconds gets a lot longer if you can stop the clock 3 times. And it's certainly
when you can use the whole field.
Absolutely.
When you can use the whole field, because you make the defense defend the whole field, not just, we can defend the sideline, tackle them inbounds, the clock is going to run, they're not going to be able to get in kicking range, right? So that was definitely a key sequence in this game. We do have to move on, though, to talk about this game coming up Thursday night in Detroit, and we will do that right after this sponsor business. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousins Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousins Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, well, it's another Thursday game. It's another Thursday night game. This one will be at Ford Field in Detroit. The 9-3 Packers visiting the 11-1 Detroit Lions. The Lions, a close shave on Thanksgiving, completely dominate the first half against the Chicago Bears, and then they are hanging on for dear life to not let the game go to overtime, and the Bears end up botching the whole final sequence. They get their coach fired and all that. The bottom line is the Detroit Lions are 11-1. The Packers are 2 games back at 9-3. And let's be real here, Wes. If the Packers are going to have any chance, any realistic chance of winning the NFC North, they have to win this game on Thursday night. If the Packers go to Detroit and lose, by all means, not all is lost, but it becomes wild card or bust at 100%. That point. So if the Packers are going to threaten the Lions for the NFC North title and the Vikings for that matter, it's on the line Thursday night at Ford Field.
I saw this tweet. I want to give the proper credit. I believe it was Zach Cruz was the one that tweeted this. The Packers, even if they beat the Lions and the Vikings, I still think there's like a 36% chance of them winning the division. So losing either of those games obviously would diminish that potential.
Yeah.
That's with the New York Times playoff generator. All that being said, the Detroit Lions, I thought what Larry's point was in 3 things might have been the most salient thing any of us have said all season, where so many people, myself included, were watching that game against the Bears being like, all right, come on, Chicago, let's pull this thing out. And Larry said, he's like, no, if there's going to be a wake-up call, it should be against the Packers. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. The Packers' momentum and how they've built since that loss to the Lions has been really critical to how this season has played out. And as Xavier McKinney said, he actually sent a text message to some of his teammates after the bye saying, hey, let's just win the rest of these things. And he left that game, as disappointing as it was, as slow as of a start as Green Bay had against the Lions. He didn't feel like they were outclassed. He didn't leave that game feeling like, hey, we can't play with these guys. The Packers had a menagerie of errors and penalties and setbacks that they just could not overcome in that game.
Yeah.
And now suddenly everything's back there for you. 9 wins. I think there's a 96% chance right now of Green Bay making the playoffs with 5 games to go in the regular season. But you got to go one game at a time, and there is no bigger game than going back into Ford Field just over a year after they played and defeated and upset the Detroit Lions on their home field, and going back and trying to do it once again.
Well, the Packers are a very different team from the first meeting, not only in the ways that we've been talking about offensively, defensively, the way they're playing, certainly the way the running game is playing, the reduction in turnovers, the red zone efficiency, what the run defense for Green Bay is doing as of late. Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, the running backs the Packers have faced the last couple weeks have not been able to do anything on the ground. The Packers are also different from a health standpoint compared to the first game against Detroit. Jordan Love is certainly healthier. He had just had the groin injury the week before in Jacksonville and basically didn't really practice all week long leading up to the first Detroit game. He was healthy enough to play, but obviously was not himself. Jordan Love is in a very different place. Josh Myers, Evan Williams, Jair Alexander all missed the first Detroit game. that was the only game this season the Packers have not had their main starting five for the offensive line, where they had to move Elton Jenkins to center and all that. So hopefully the continuity is there for that group. Evan Williams has since returned to the lineup from his hamstring injury that forced him to miss the first Detroit game. And as I said before, Alexander is back at practice this week, trying to work his way back from the knee injury. We'll see if he's available. So health-wise, I think the Packers are a very different team than the first time against Detroit. On the Lions side, the Lions are banged up on defense. This is a very different-looking defense than the one the Packers faced a month ago, because now Hutchinson was already out, but they have had a number of injuries since then. Linebackers who have gone on injured reserve, and now some defensive linemen who seem iffy for this game as to whether or not they're going to be able to play. Offensively, the Lions are healthy, and this is the unit that that the Lions are relying on. This is the unit that, for Detroit, they're looking at. These are the guys who are going to take them to the promised land. Yep. I mean, Jared Goff, the two running backs, St. Brown, Laporta, all those guys. It feels like it's going to be a very different matchup in a lot of ways than a month ago, but the one thing that isn't different is Detroit's offense.
Do you know, Mike, how many players the Detroit Lions now have on injured reserve after they made some moves this week?
I don't, but I'm guessing it's probably upwards of like 13, 14.
18 guys.
18?
I mean, they lost several guys at the beginning of the season, too.
Wow.
Like even before the year. They've been beat up. And as much as people talk about Aiden Hutchinson, and you should, was potentially the NFL Defensive Player of the Year at the time in which he got injured.
Yep.
But Alex Anzalone, I say it probably every time you and I do the show, I think is the most underrated guy, potentially in the National Football League, but certainly when it comes to defensive and linebacking play. This guy, what he's turned himself into, he is the heartbeat of that defense. He is the guy that is the rallying cry for that team, and to not have him available right now, I think has been a big hit for them. They've made some moves. Za'Darius Smith obviously is now in Detroit. He has 2 sacks in 3 games. They are moving him everywhere once again, much like the Packers once did. If we know anything about Za'Darius, when it comes to him coming out of the gate, starting with a new team, a fresh start, he always plays really well. He did it in Green Bay, he did it in Minnesota, and he certainly did it in Cleveland. So seeing him, the kind of the enthusiasm and the energy that he's injected into that defense, you can feel it. But the fact of the matter is they still are a hurting unit. And there are a lot of players in that secondary that I've had to kind of fight through some things as well. They still have their 1-2 punch. Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, probably 2 as good as they get in the National Football League, especially with the versatility of Branch to pretty much move him anywhere you want. He is an incredible chess piece. Offensively, you're right. They are healthy. Taylor Decker does have some questions, though, at left tackle. We'll see how this week works out for him.
That's right. Dan Skipper has started a couple games at left tackle, including the Thanksgiving game against the Chicago Bears. Skipper was in there in place of Decker.
And Skipper's kind of like the Evan Smith of that line. Like, he's the guy that just always seems to be in there if there's an injury that creeps up, and has been sort of a dependable veteran for them as well. But the big difference for the Lions compared to that first game is Jamison Williams is available. He's not suspended. He's back. He's making huge plays for them. The contrast of his explosive style with just the consistency of Amon-Ra St. Brown, that is a very difficult thing to deal with. Sam Laporta has battled some injuries. We'll see exactly where he's at physically and how he performs in this game. But with a 1-2 punch in the backfield like Gibbs and Montgomery, and potentially both of those guys going over 1,000 yards this season, like I said last time, I mean, Ben Johnson is going to be a head coach in the National Football League this year. This will be his last year as the offensive coordinator of the Lions. Yep. Cannot see it any other way. He's going to be the most highly coveted coach in the National Football League in 2025. But in the here and now, man, this is about as explosive and as consistent of as an offense as there is in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jared Goff is still completing 72% of his passes on the season. His season passer rating is in the triple digits, over 100. I added up what running backs David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs have done. This is crazy, Wes. 329 carries, 1,693 yards, and 21 rushing touchdowns in 12 games.
Yep.
I mean, those are tremendous numbers for a 1-2 running back punch for an entire season. And those guys have done that, 329, 1693, and 21 in 12 games. It's remarkable the offensive machine that the Lions have become. Now, here's the interesting thing, though. Like, they looked like they were just on their way to a complete and total demolition of the Chicago Bears on Thanksgiving with that early game. But in the second half, Chicago Bears defense started to stand tall. The Bears got their offense going, and they made a game of it. And the Lions never put the game away with that offense.
No.
As much as it was humming in the first half. They did have some red zone struggles. They were kicking too many field goals, so they didn't put the Bears away there. But then they also couldn't put them away in the second half because they couldn't get a big-time drive going when they really needed one. So it's interesting how this has unfolded because while a lot of people are saying the Lions might be the best team in football, and at 11-1, they've certainly looked better as a one-loss team than the Kansas City Chiefs have. So I certainly understand that argument, and I take nothing away from them. But this isn't a team that plays perfect football.
No.
And the Packers are going in there knowing, hey, Green Bay walked out of that tunnel at Ford Field last year on Thanksgiving for that 11:30 a.m. Central Time kickoff and took it to the first place team when not a lot of people gave them a chance. And it was a win that ended up shaping a lot of how the end of the season unfolded for the Packers. If you're Green Bay, man, you're looking at trying to do exactly the same thing on Thursday night.
And again, I don't know if you're probably going to spin this off into the keys to victory, so I don't want to give away too much, but you have to play with physicality against the Lions. There aren't any losses to really point to in terms of what's the key to beating them. The one that they did, I remember that was where they afterwards, you kind of heard Dan Campbell fall on the sword for some of the coaching decisions that were made in that loss to Tampa Bay in week 2. But when it's been close, whether it was what Chicago did or Houston or some of these other teams, it's when teams played physical. You got to play error-free football. You can't set yourself back with penalties. You can't turn it over. They'll make you pay for it. Possessions are always at a premium with this team, but you have to play with physicality.
Yeah.
And I think Green Bay knows that, and they saw that. The other thing that stands out that's interesting to me is the Lions have outscored teams 383 to 203, almost doubling up teams. But they've been outscored in the first and fourth quarters. Fourth quarter, it makes total sense because they're playing with leads. Teams don't,
and they've had some games with massive leads,
absolutely
huge leads.
But a lot of their damage is done in those second and third quarters. 48 points in the first quarter to 174 in the second. The third quarter, 106. I mean, they are looking to double you up at the end of the half. They are looking to really take it to you and take games away from you. Jacksonville added a lot to that. Some of these games have added a lot to those numbers. But that being said, this is a very dangerous football team if you do not counter their punches. And I think the Green Bay Packers, with that first matchup at Lambeau Field, understand exactly what the type of opponent that they're facing and what you have to do to take them down.
Yeah, they've basically averaged 2 touchdowns per game in the second quarter.
Yeah.
When they get their offense rolling, the points that they end up putting up before halftime is pretty impressive. I would say if you look at the three games this year that Detroit has looked the most vulnerable, the loss to Tampa Bay back in week 2, the very close loss where they had to come from behind against Houston, and then last week against the Bears. If there's a common thread to those, it's the opposing defense rising up in the red zone and making the Lions kick field goals instead of getting touchdowns. Because when the Lions get touchdowns, they end up with 40-plus on the board. But you make them kick field goals, you can keep the point total in the 20s, and that gives you a chance. That gives your offense a chance, especially right now with their defense as banged up as it is. It gives your offense a chance to score enough to be able to win. Let's go right into keys to victory, and a lot of them we've already talked about. For me, and again, I'm not taking anything away from the Lions, but looking strictly at what the Packers have been doing, you have to just keep doing what you're doing. You have to keep the turnovers to a minimum. You have to keep the red zone efficiency up. You have to keep the miscues to a minimum, talking about the drop passes, the penalties, which I think are down. On the defensive side of the ball, for those, the fans are frustrated with the jumping offsides, the lining up offsides and stuff like that. Don't think the Packers aren't frustrated with it as well. Just take a look at what Matt LaFleur said at the podium with regard to that. Take a look at what Jeff Hafley said at the podium with regard to the offsides. The Packers they haven't figured out how to stop that happening yet, but there's definitely frustration mounting in that it can't continue. The Packers know they can't do that 2, 3, 4 times against the Detroit Lions on Thursday night and expect to win. You're just giving away too much. So all of those things, if the penalties start to come down in the same way that the drop passes have been reduced, the turnovers have been reduced, and the red zone efficiency has gone up, if the penalties come down along with that, the Packers will give themselves a chance to win this game.
There is no team in the National Football League, at least I haven't run the whole sabermetrics numbers or anything like that, but when you look at situational football on both offense and defense, Detroit is the cream of the crop. Offensively, you look at it, 4th in third down conversions, 6th in red zone, 3rd in goal to go. You look at the defensive side of things for them, 1st in third down defense, 2nd in red zone, 3rd in goal to go. The Lions beat you inside the 20. That's how they win. So what do you have to do? Well, first and foremost, you cannot be on 3rd and long against this team. Kirby Joseph is just salivating on the back end, wanting you to throw that football in those instances. Jordan Love somewhat saw that in this last encounter with them.
Yep.
You see him when you get put in adverse situations, if you can't run against their front, if you can't cut those yards in half on first down, the Detroit Lions are going to feast. Conversely, the first thing that the Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell philosophy since the very beginning, the thing that they instilled even when they were a 3-win team was, we are going to run the football. They did it with Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams set the single-season touchdown record, and then they let him go. I mean, this is the way that these guys are wired.
Yeah.
They want to run the football. They want to have that contrast between Montgomery and Gibbs. Personally, I favor Gibbs. I've watched Montgomery for a lot of years. Very talented guy, very violent running back, difficult to bring him to the ground. Jahmyr Gibbs is a home run hitter. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to play a long time in the National Football League. And I feel like if you can take away the explosive gains there, you have a chance. What happened in that first game was they kept him, and Jeff Hafley talked about this. There's so many times where the Packers will keep you to a 1-yard game, a negative 2-yard rush, 0 yards, and then they'll spin one off for 16. Green Bay has to keep that stuff in check, because if you do that, Jared Goff's going to be right where he wants to be.
Yeah, Montgomery is the running back who wears you out. Gibbs is the running back who scares you.
Yes,
because of that.
He's the one that knocks you out.
Yeah, the home run hitting ability that he has. Well, I already sort of started in the transition to talking about the Lions with where things are, the NFC North implications of this game. It's pretty clear for Green Bay. In between Green Bay and Detroit, of course, you still have the Minnesota Vikings. They are at 10-2. They survived a very close call against the Arizona Cardinals. I'll just say they got a little bit of help from the officials in that one.
A little.
But okay. But hey, we move on.
But hey, Sam Darnold got his face mask in the end zone, grabbed at some point. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
They had no chance to win that game.
But it's funny, Wes. If you had told me at the beginning of the season that the Packers would be 9-3 going to Detroit for this big Thursday night game, but they'd be sitting in 3rd place and 2 games back in the division, it's before the season started, it would have been hard to picture like that actually being reality.
Yes.
But here we are. The Lions have 11 wins. The Vikings have 10. The Packers have 9. The whole country's going to be watching. This one, and it's one of the first really, really big down the stretch games in the NFL here.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you want to get pumped up for this game, I ended up basically writing a story on it on Monday. Dan Campbell's presser, where he's talking about this race that is beginning in the NFC North. And, so many guys are like Matt LaFleur's reaction to finding out that the Vikings won. Dan Campbell almost seemed to be embracing it. He's like, they won, great. The guy is just wired differently. He is embracing that grind, and if it means pushing his team to being 16-1 to win the North, he's fine with it. If that's what it ends up having to be.
Right.
But all that being said, I did that story this week looking at the NFC North. I found this absolutely fascinating because people want to kind of dog on the Bears a little bit. Yeah, they've gone through a lot, but the Bears have won 4 games and at one point were 4-2. The 34 wins that the NFC North has amassed through 13 weeks is already the 3rd most of the division, tied for the 3rd most that the division has won, going back to 2002. I mean, In 2011, they won 36 games, but that was partially buoyed by the fact that the Packers won 15 of their own.
Yeah.
The competition there and the way that all three of these teams are performing and the fact that they have 6 losses amongst the Lions, Vikings, and Packers, and 3 of those were divvied out amongst themselves. I mean, it just shows you that the standard and the way that, and all 3 of these teams have done it differently. Minnesota was the team that I had in the cellar of the division this year. Right after J.J. McCarthy got hurt, I'm like, this team's got no chance.
Yeah.
And Kevin O'Connell is doing what Kevin O'Connell does and making this thing work. Detroit has been the team, the juggernaut everybody expects them to be, and Green Bay has taken that next step through the first 13 weeks. I know it's a different week, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but there's a pivotal game at U.S. Bank Stadium this weekend between the Atlanta Falcons, who now they're having questions. Should Michael Penix, should he be the quarterback? They're 6-6, but still right in the thick of this thing for a wide open NFC South.
Right when Kirk Cousins is coming back to Minneapolis, right? I mean,
crazy.
It's funny how these things unfold and the timing of them, right?
And I give the Vikings brass a lot of credit, man. They made a difficult decision to move on from Kirk Cousins, but the fact of the matter was they had to do better. What they did, they gave it a good shot. It didn't work. What's the next step? Who's the next quarterback? You get Sam Darnold on a 1-year deal for $10 million, and he plays half the season like an MVP. These are the type of kind of gut-wrenching moves that you occasionally have to make. The Packers had to make one of their own with Aaron Jones. So, I mean, this is a very interesting week for the whole NFL, and certainly the Packers kick it off against the Lions. And if you could find a way to win this thing again and make it 2-for-2 at Ford Field, and suddenly the Green Bay Packers and Minnesota Vikings find themselves 1 game behind the Lions with 4 games left to play.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the scenario the Packers are hoping for, and we will see what unfolds. Before we go, I have to let you know the countdown to the 2025 NFL Draft has begun. Green Bay is hosting this year, and you won't want to miss it. Mark your calendars for April 24 through April 26 of 2025 and visit greenbay.com/draft25 for more information. With that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team and of Thursday night's big game from Ford Field in Detroit. Wes and I will be there. We will have it all for you on Packers.com, and we'll be back on our regular 2 shows per week schedule with Packers Unscripted beginning next week. So thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you next time.